So this all started because of this young man here. He found this book. He found this book when they were renovating the O'Hare's home house in Glen. So this is where all this data has come from. And when Collette and I saw this book, I says, you know, there's a story in this. And this story is about this man's father and this woman's father, who set up an industry here in the village in the late 50s/60s to ship lambs to Dublin, which then eventually ended up in France. So this is where this all comes from. So this book is the Bible, and this man called Peter O'Hare, who was a great friend of Tommy McVeigh, kept this ledger so that we could look at it. Now, there is loads of information in it that we will look at as we go through the evening. So, O'Hare and McVeigh Livestock Haulage, they were lamb exporters. They bought lambs round the marts, and this book is from April 1959 until February 62. Go back, just give me 1 second. Never does what you're told. So, this is very important. This is the lorry that's in this book. It's a Commer, as Thomas will tell us, it's a Commer. It was bought in McAlinton's in Uri in, we reckon, 1959-60. We have the invoice for it. And here is Peter O'Hare. This is Peter here. This is Colette's father, Kevin. And Peter was the owner of this book and the driver of the lorry and the friend of Tommy. So this book is the Journal of Peter O'Hare. It's found in the home, as we said, and it's a glimpse into the late 1950s and early 1960s in the export of lambs to Paris. So these are the two men that we're going to talk about this evening. Thomas, you tell us a wee bit about your father there.
Dad, he started off in 1955-6 with Paddy Nolan along with Uncle Joe, and started the early export of lambs from the north of Ireland to Dublin, which was a bit of pioneering stuff then, because it was just coming off the back of the rationing, which was 1954. So the march started up in 1954, and then the export of lambs started about then. They identified at an early stage that the northern lamb was a much lighter lamb for the French market than what the southern lamb would have been. Heavier carcasses, too fat. So therefore, the northern Ireland lamb came into the zone then at that stage, and they were produced at a lighter weight as well. The ideal carcass weight was 40 to 45 pound. A little bit more, not much more, but you could have went maybe to 38 pound, but they didn't tolerate any heavier. And then, as Felix will tell you and show you later, you will see individual marts were on a daily basis, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right through to Saturday, different times, so you couldn't be everywhere. So my father would have covered one mart, my daddy's brother, Uncle Joe, covered another, and maybe other dealers like Alec Wilson and that, and you will see that all documented, you know.
So go back to the last one, please. So that's Thomas, or Tommy McVeigh, as we had known him, just lived across the street where Peter lives now. So that's Tommy, and this is Peter O'Hare, who lived in Glen. And Peter was a sensible man. He never married, and I knew him for what? He died in the year 2000, and Tommy died in 89. So these are the two men. They were in their prime whenever they were doing this. The other two people here is Yvonne's father, Joe. Joe lived down, as we would call it, the line, or down the canal bank. And there seemed to be, again, we're sketchy here, there was a meeting in Enniskillen around 1955 with this man called Paddy Dolan. And Paddy Dolan was the owner of the abattoir, and he shipped the lambs to France, Paris, France. And this meeting between these two men kicked this all off, circa 1955. We'll go again, please, Collette. So, should be familiar to us. This is the pass corner. You can see, could you imagine trying to drive up through it now? Morgan and McLaren would have fun coming through that one, right? You can see all the cattle. There must have been some cattle down on the street that evening. Anybody have an idea of what year that would be? Francis? Thank you, Francis. 1905. Don't tell me you took the photograph, Francis, now. Right? So there's 1905, there's the march. So we're trying to show a progression here. And we'll go again. Hilltown, sheep sale. Francis again. Right? Obviously didn't take the snap. So we're talking about, I would say, in around 1920. But you can see the sheep are horned ewes for anybody who's not from the area. Not great quality in them. Edmund wouldn't just agree with that because he would say to sell them. But he would say, like all auctioneers, he'd tell you lies. Well, I'll tell you, we're further down that one. So there's Hilltown. So we can see there was no march. And then, can we go again? This is a modern day mart. And we've got Suffolk lambs. Now, I did some searching to find a pen of Suffolk lambs that could do for Thomas here. It was quite an ordeal. So now we know the Suffolk lambs. This is the Suffolk lamb that was exported to France in the late 50s and early 60s. We reckon that they were about £4. At a stretch, a fiver. Yeah. That's what we think they were. Today, £100. Any crying farmers in amongst us? They'll probably say they're worth nothing. Like. James, what are they worth today? 100. So we're talking about a factor of roughly what? 20. Maybe 25 is the change in revenue. And we found that that's not far off the mark for all these revenues. So here's the remit. It was to buy Northern Irish lamb from all over the province. And we'll see that in a minute. It just wasn't local this for the French market. Northern Irish lambs were sold earlier. Probably the farmers that miserable wouldn't feed them. But the Northern Irish lambs were sold earlier. They were later than the Irish lamb, than the Southern lamb, which was heavier. So these later Northern Irish lambs went to Dublin and they were slaughtered in, give us the address, Thomas, again.
And they were slaughtered in Ballymun, Cloughrane, County Dublin.
So just this side of Dublin. And Coley, you'd agree with that?
Back of the airport.
Back of the airport. Coley was there many a time. So we're lucky to have Coley here because Coley drove these machines, so we're lucky to know, because none of us would drive it today, like. Wouldn't have any aircon in it. So the abattoir was in Dublin, and the leg of the lamb carcass, I got to change the spelling for you, Barbara, there you are, that the French market required was exported to France. Now, here's Tommy. I'll sit down.
Yeah, it would have been, yes, it would have been starting early morning. Could even have started early in that if lorries had been loaded. Depends where the mart was. If you're going to Limavady, you needed to be away early. Probably an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4, Coleman, or something like that.
What about
To drive in a car back then. Yeah. You went to the mart, you surveyed the sheep, you'd have walked through the mart to see what was there, and then it started. Probably around the 10 o'clock mark, and it was a pretty intense, the next few hours were pretty intense. Yet all them sheep were offloaded by the farmers through the sale yards, had to be inspected by the graders. And when the sale got going, the auctioneers and people like Don Best, the Brysons and all that there, you were motoring through, you hadn't... But your dad was. And there's a photograph of him. There's a photograph of him.
He's on the clothesline.
He's on the clothesline, yes. And you hadn't, as I'm right in saying, Edmund, you wouldn't have had too many seconds to survey your lambs as they come through the ring. It's a split second. Yeah. So you needed to do, and each man had his own type of lamb to buy. You had other dealers like Crillies and that would bought heavier lamb, so therefore it didn't clash. But there was plenty of demand for that lighter lamb. Not unknown to buy 120 lambs, but in big sales at the peak time of year, it could have went to 300, 400, and the odd occasion it could have went over it. So when that was over, there was a lot of sheep to be transported. To give you an idea, that 120 lambs today, that was a pretty big lorry for that time. A modern day 3-decker will lift in the region of 400 to 450, and a 4-decker will lift over 600 lambs and get you to Dublin in a little over an hour and maybe 20 minutes, where then from Poyntzpass to Dublin would have been probably 2.5 hours through all the villages and towns, the customs and all that there, you know. So things have moved on, you know, in quite a bit. The lorry would have arrived as, you know, within reason. She would have arrived as soon as the sale had got going, and you loaded her fairly quickly. Yes. Yes, the custom. Yes, you had quite a bit of paper. There would be paperwork, and later on, and even if you're going later, you had to ask for a request. Yeah, so you had to. Well, you had to stop. Isn't that right, Coleman? You had to stop at the customs.
Sometimes.
Now, come on, Coley, all the time, all the time.
Turn that recording off, too. Sometimes.
Oh, yeah. And therefore, they may have left the march around 4 to 5 o'clock, but they just didn't stop at that because the lorry mightn't have arrived. There could have been a second lorry required, and the mart manager or whatever would have been about to load them later on. And then some of them would have went direct. Maybe a half load had to go back to the paddock, which is down the canal bank, and maybe mixed with another load, you know.
What's on the next one? Flick back. Just to let you, just so that we have a perception of what's going on here, we reckon in the past there was no more than 5 phones then. Right, we all got our own ring, a phone in our pocket. So Tommy had a phone. I think he was the only one with a phone in the street. Somebody will tell me I'm a liar. Peter O'Hare had a phone. Yeah. It's still there. The Mart had a phone. So the only way that these people connected was with the phone, and they would have rang into the Mart to see. So the lorry man, Peter, rang the Mart to confirm load numbers. It wasn't, you know, a text coming through or a phone call coming through. So we must realise that the communications here were very slack. And I know whenever I met Tommy down the street, he would have asked me how Peter O'Hare was, and he said, I can remember what he always said, Peter O'Hare never let me down. He always turned up. You weren't ringing to find out where he was. So this partnership between these two worked really well. Tommy the buyer and Peter the haulier. Can we go again? So we looked at a typical day there for Tommy. Do you think we've done enough for Tommy on that day?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, this was a typical week for Peter. And I'm going to ask Coley again here, because Coley's one of the few in this room that knows what it was to drive these lorries. Were they comfortable, Coley?
No, far from it.
Far from it. Had the air suspension, Coley? Had the suspension seat?
Air coming through the floor.
Yes, air coming through the floor. Had it a heater, Coley? No. So we're putting things. Was it quiet that you could listen to the radio? Yeah, you see. So I want you to put that into perspective of these lorries. These lorries were utilitarian, right? So this is where this man worked. This man worked, and later on we're going to see what he did in a day. But I want you to go back to the 1950s, and there was no motorways of any sort. Strabane, I think it's in County Tyrone. I think it's just on the. He went from Strabane to Dublin for Paddy and Hughie Quilly. Now, remember, this man started in George Pass. George Pass, Strabane, Dublin, George Pass. 12-hour day. Then we went from Limavady right up in the top. Limavady to Dublin. Here to Limavady to Dublin to George Pass.
Roughly, Poyntzpass was the halfway mark.
Yes.
Speaking between the two, yeah.
I've always said it's the epicenter of the universe anyway, so it doesn't make much difference. Right. So over to Dublin. And here, just look at the 16th. He went from Poyntzpass to Dublin. So he went from the Paddock. We'll see that shortly. He went from the Paddock to Dublin to Downpatrick, and then Downpatrick to Dublin, and Dublin to George Pass in Coley's luxury lorry in the one day. And remember, Thomas, you'd remember some of those lorries too. Your father would have driven them.
Yeah.
They weren't renowned for their comfort. No. So what we're trying to get across here is these pioneers were pioneers. They were really bringing the thing out. Clare to Dublin. If you ask somebody to drive from Clare to Dublin now, they'd say, oh, this town, because there's no motorway and most of that. And then finally Armagh to Dublin. And the other thing I just want to highlight, Strabane, Limavady, Omagh, Downpatrick, Clare, Armagh, all over the province. All over it. Can we try another one, please, Ms. Rafferty? We're back to the paddock. Thomas, you can take over there.
Yeah, that's where the most of the lambs, if it was loaded from the paddocks, were loaded out of this pen. From the late 50s onwards. That pen was built in the early 60s. Literally, lambs left there to go to France, went, believe it or not, to other parts of the world as well. Remember lambs in the 70s going to Libya. Some went to Italy. There was lambs in the late 60s went to the Indian island, Indian Ocean island of Mauritius. The Irish government done an export thing back then to that country, and a boat had to be filled, so it was partially filled from there as well. The pens are still there, obviously not the same activity with sheep anymore, but that was those two little paddocks turned some sheep in their time. Hundreds of sheep a day, if not a week, you know. This pen today would simply not accommodate a modern lorry. You could have got the lorries in then, the 14 to 15 foot lorries back then, but you could not get a modern lorry in there now.
So this is the epicenter. This is where the lambs came back. They were sorted, and then they were loaded, and they went to Dublin. So they would come from all over the north to here, and it's just about 3/4 of a mile down the line, down the canal bank. You walk past it or cycle past it now, and that's where Tommy and Peter and Joe all did their work to ship these lambs all to Dublin. Can we go again? Right, Tommy. Or Thomas.
Yeah.
Only a generation.
I remember Daddy, first of all, the first car I remember him with was a Vanguard. But in the early 60s, he drove 3 of these here that I can remember, and there's 2 of the colours. And I think he'd one with a blue stripe. And Uncle Joe would have driven a standard van and then a Morris van, isn't that right, Yvonne? Yep. So that was the mode of transport back then.
So you're going to Limavady from Poyntzpass in that? Lord knows all over the north in that.
Yeah.
So this is the mode of transport that was used then.
Yeah.
Will we go again?
Yes.
Thomas, did Larry Goodman go to your father in Limavady with you?
He would have had, yes. They would have met there at the door. And the odd time, depends on what way it worked. They went mostly from there to Alec Wilson's and picked up Alec, and they'd have swapped cars week about. And they would have met there, went to Alec's, on into Limavady. And they'd have done their own band, they'd done their separate band, and then back again that evening, yeah. Because it's a pretty long journey back then, you know.
And for those who don't know Larry Goodman, he was Mr. Beef in the south, right? There's no bigger man than Larry Goodman. So, we're on to the next one again, Tommy and Joe. And this is what they did, and we'll match this up with Peter's records later on. So if you just rattle through them, please, Thomas.
Yeah. Belfast on a Monday was there was up to 3 marts in it. There was Allen's, Robinson's and Colgan's all in the one area, Holy, isn't that right?
Yeah.
So Allen's being a pretty big one, you would have a lot of lambs and through Allen's, and there was a lot of activity in it. A lot of butchers came and bought their lambs there as well. And I remember, Daddy saying many's a time 2 and 3 load come out of Allen's on a Monday. And then Daddy probably was in Allen's, Joe in Robinson's, and maybe like a Hammy Coat or somebody in Colgan's. The next day, Tommy Limavady, Uncle Joe went to Banbridge. Depending on the time of year, Market Hill was on a Wednesday, Omagh on a Tuesday. Banbridge was probably, it's not mentioned there, but Banbridge was probably on a Tuesday.
Banbridge did by Joe.
Yes, Joe. This would have alternated from time to time. It could have been Banbridge and it could have been Omagh on a Tuesday, depending on the time of year. Thursday was Downpatrick with Father Rafferty. Joe went to Rafferty. Generally, there was no sale. The near sale would have been probably Larne. There's a couple of mentions of Larne in that, but they didn't go frequently. That would have been mostly for buying in the country, privately. And then Saturday, both of them, Tommy and Joe, done Armagh.
Next one, please. So here's Peter's, this comes out of the book. Now, look at the down the side, £12, £18, £10, £10, £14, £12, £10, £10. You'd got a job as an auctioneer there.
So
Gary was going to say that boy could do rightly, you know.
£18 from Limavady.
That was for the lorry to take the sheep from Poyntzpass to Limavady, to Dublin, and back to Poyntzpass. £18. That included the lorry, the man, the fuel, everything. Yeah. £18. So that's the sort of money we're talking about here. So put it in real terms, 4 or 5 sheep, so £400. Yeah. You couldn't do it today for it. No. Just as a sort of a short burst here, fuel, the diesel. No, we're not going to discuss red diesel nor white diesel here for in case the customs are here. They could be a bit chancy. Take a wee look around there, see if there's anybody shady looking. Brave look of shady ones. But we reckon that the diesel then, we can't really decipher whether it was white or red, so we're not saying. But it was 4 or 5 pence a litre.
A litre. No, a gallon.
No, a litre.
A litre. Right.
You were buying 200 gallons for £14. Fair enough? 200 gallons at £14. Some of you can do the sums on that. It's 4p or 5p pence a litre. Roughly a shilling a litre. So that puts that all, and that's what Peter here did, and that's Peter's handwriting on that there. Isn't it? Well done. As a teacher, I would give him tick. Very good. Go on ahead, please, Collette. So here we are with all the marts that we could find, and here we have, now we're a wee bit to do here in Blessington, which is in County Wicklow, where Thomas's father bought lambs. We're going to talk about that in a minute. There's Dublin, where the abattoir, Coley about here somewhere. Right, about here somewhere. Right? So all these lambs came across the border. We're talking roughly between 120 plus a day minimum, maybe 240, and we reckon that one day out of the book we got 360 lambs. 360 lambs from the north to be killed in an abattoir in Dublin in the one day. Coley, along with that, taking the lorry, 3 loads of lambs. Well, they were coming.
She came from the paddock. I remember Uncle Joe telling me she'd done it from the paddock, all from the paddock. And I think she went on the 3rd load for an 8 o'clock request that night to get through the border. Yeah.
So there's 15 hours on that luxury lorry.
For the 3rd time that day, yeah.
So you can see all over the province, Limavady, Strabane, Castledorg, Omagh, Clacker, Rafferty, Market Hill, Poyntzpass. Funny, that should be the centre of Ireland, I would have thought. Banbridge, down Paddock. So that's all the march this man's fellow drove to, bought the sheep. Peter O'Hare went and lifted them and brought them to Dublin. Now, this is a mart.
Just near the end of it, yeah. 1963. Belfast.
So we went from the Pass Yard, Hilltown Street to this.
What's the next there we go. Very young Don Best.
Local auctioneer.
Yeah. I don't think he ever sold many horses, but that was one.
Now, just so...
That's only an idea of auctioneers just... And Edmund's father would have been in that, Eamon McGill and all those guys, they all auctioneered at that time.
Was that a pony sale every Christmas?
Is that what it was?
Yep, every Christmas they had.
And was that probably Allams or Robinson, some of those ones? Yeah, probably Robson's. So that's where the ponies came from, yes?
Now, yeah. Thank you. So this is typical. Don Best, Barbara, John, Gary's father, run the marts, and he would have been around these marts as well as these people selling them. So one day, my good lady wife and I were in Blessington. This has also happened just after Ryan gave me the book. And I says, I could link the two in Blessington. So Blessington is in County Wicklow, And we were walking up and down the street. It's like most southern towns or most towns now. There's lots of empty shops. And we found this picture, and it said circa 1960s. And I says, I bet you Tommy was here. So there's the Downshire Arms as it is today. That was, when were we there, Collette? 2021, maybe a year ago. So this is where Tommy would have
Ended up, well, Blessington. It's the one town where sheep come the other road, seasonal. So all the lambs would have went to the north, but from July onwards you'd have travelled down to Blessington for the breeding ewe sales. You had a tremendous ewe down there, Suffolk Cross Cheviot, and sometimes the pure Cheviot as well. So it was a pretty long day to go down to there. So the days that he was there, obviously had to get somebody to cover the march. So probably 110 mile from here. About 100 to 110 mile. You had to go through all the villages plus Dublin. So when the sale was over, you ended up as the only eating place around was in the Downshire Arms, and it's the one time where the lorry, if she had been in Dublin, she would have come on to Blessington and then took the sheep back down the road. And there's a few stories about Blessington. The lorry didn't always arrive before you left the sale, and you had to make arrangements with the mart man, which was Johnny Devine. And there was only one place you'd have found Johnny after 9 o'clock at night, and when the equivalent of Canavan's. And sometimes he wouldn't have been in the best of shape, but that was probably no lorry probably would go south now without coming back with some sort of a load. And it's all back loads now, as they call it. Back then the lorries went one way, with exceptions of July till October, and brought the breeding ewes home with them. Yeah. Again,
on these cards that Peter kept meticulously, he wrote down, he's coming from Blessington down to the Paddock or wherever he is coming. So we'll just say a few in here. Here's the Blessington load card. Monday the 21st of September, 29 ewes from Blessington to Ravensdale.
You shouldn't have done that.
Say Coley, keep quiet. Coley, that's it. And then there's another one here. Where are we? It's terrible when you get blind. Paddock to Dublin. No, I'm wrong. There's a Blessington here somewhere. Where?
Yeah, at the bottom there, Friday.
All right, Friday the 26th, that's the 26th of January. 101 sheep from Blessington to Poyntzpass. So again, there was breeding ewes coming from Blessington to Poyntzpass in the late 50s and early 60s.
And that continued right on through to the late 80s.
Yeah. The late 80s. Yeah. Can we go again? So, these are the best photographs I could get off the Commer lorry. This is a Commer 7-ton lorry. What cc would the engine have been on that, Coley? Thomas, would you have any idea? Well, she wouldn't be the quickest.
Horsepower wise, Thomas, would have been 70 to 100 horse max. Wouldn't have been that, no.
So these are the sorts of lorries. Now there was a back on it. Can we go with another one? Yes, there's the back that was on them, right? Now, unfortunately, we have an Austin here, and that's our local driver, Norman Ellison, about 1960s. And you can see the mahogany. Now, none of the rainforest crowd get up and start shouting at me. You can see the mahogany here on the back. Now, the mahogany would have been a load in itself.
Yeah.
Make a lovely dining room table today if you had it, but I wouldn't say that. So, there's the mahogany. We believe there was a deck in her.
There was a deck on her, yes.
Right.
She would have drew lambs as well for us, yeah.
Now, it wouldn't be like the hydraulic decks you have today. You'd have to manually lift these decks. So, anybody know that lorry or Rue Bickerstaff's by any chance?
Yeah.
Who? Up in the front box, up here.
Yeah.
Right.
Father and Peter O'Hare later on, about 62-3, bought a second lorry. She's not in this documentation.
And she was an Austin.
And she was in Austin, but she was unique. She came out of Scotland, and she was one of the first to have an aluminium body, but no box on her. The box carried about 10 to 12 lambs, so she carried about 100. And when she was sold, the Jimmy Trainer bought the lorry, and Alan Davison bought the body and turned it into a lorry and trailer with aluminium sides. Yeah.
So here's Colette's father, Kevin, and there's Peter. And the only way I could pick the Commer up was Do you see these bands? You see those bands there and the mirrors? Could you go back to the last one?
No, it's
Go
not the
again.
one, but-
You see the bands and the mirrors on it. Right, so there are very few of these English lorries left. So can we go back down again? So Kevin was Peter's brother, and he helped maintain the wooden body. Now, thank God we found this. The date is the 16th of the 2nd, 1961. I wasn't even born. A lot of you are saying, I don't believe that. It was a Commerce 7 ton. It had a Roots diesel engine. It had an Eaton 2-speed axle. What would that have meant? Could he go a bit faster?
There was a red lever. Wasn't there a red knob on the gear lever?
Like an extra gear.
Right,
Next
so an
to-
overdrive. This was a luxury one. She had a single heater. Right, so you wouldn't get totally foundered in it. And here's one, again, maybe some of the lorry men in here could help me. The road tax was £46 and 5 shillings. Now, in today's money, going for a lamb, that's roughly 10 lambs, 12 lambs will go for. So it's about £1,000 to £1,200 for the road tax. What would the road tax for a lorry today be, Thomas?
Brian.
So it's more or less the same. There you are. See, we're all learning. Every day is a learning day. So here we have the invoice, right? And it cost £1,988, no shillings and sixpence.
You can see the ad should started off base at 1,400, and then self-greasing units and all that there brought her up to that value there, and obviously no VAT back then either.
I probably could have worked the VAT anyway, I suppose. Shouldn't have said that. So there's it there. As you can see, we've got the receipt for O'Hare and McVeigh, George Pass. They paid £1,600. Can we go again? And here's the PSV of it, the public service vehicle. Am I right on that, Coley? The PSV for that one's 59 and that's 60. And this bill was £87 to PSV, right? And this bill here was £85 to PSV. No, it wasn't. Tell a lie. Steam cleaning, we'll come to that in a minute. 4, 6, about £8 to PSV. That was the expenses for the month. About £8. And again, all the wooden body was fixed by Colette's father, Peter's brother, Kevin O'Hare. He fixed the body off the lorry. And having known Peter, I can guarantee you everything worked the way it was supposed to. There was no bits of blue baler twine hanging that lorry together. It would have been perfect. The man was a perfectionist.
This is a name here is Jim Sloan, who Coleman would have known. He was one of the main drivers. He would have started to come in because Peter couldn't have simply done it all.
No, he couldn't have done it all.
Couldn't have done it. No way could have done it all. Is he still living or not? Still living, yeah.
So the life wasn't that hard really, like, huh? You're probably quite soft. So we're looking at just the wages for a week, right? In around £12. I'd kill for £12. So it's in around £12 a week was the wages of the lorry driver. Would that have been a right, Coley? Right?
Yeah.
No great flush of cash on that one. So we can go again. And what we're trying to show is, here's the diesel costs. 6 gallons for one 5 shillings 10 and a half pennies was 6 gallons. And here it was, we reckon it's 8 gallons for £12.
That's just outside of Swords.
So again, we got the diesel in the south, got the diesel in the north. There's Rockfoot again. Rockfoot has disappeared. We all know where Rockfoot was, where the new flats are now. There's Rockfoot, and there's a few of those in the book. But it just shows you that 12 shillings bought you. Well, we're not too sure. What do you think, Tom?
Is that
Don't
3
say
or 8?
three,
Is
say
that-
it more.
Yeah.
So 4 shillings. 4 shillings for a gallon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
48p. That must have been dear stuff. I reckon it was 8. Go ahead, Emma. That must have been real stuff. Things like this, the national, we're not too sure about this. It said livestock. Was there such a thing, Coley, as livestock lorries? Or were they just lorries?
Insurance.
Right. But then it just must have been for the lorry. It was £12 10 shillings.
But what's the sum insured was 500. So
So
that is probably covering a load of lambs, roughly speaking. No. Well, it's on paper, Collette. It mightn't actually. It mightn't have happened.
and this one here, I thought was quite interesting. 2 bags of sawdust, 1 shilling and 4. What's that? 1 shilling and 4 would be about 8p
8p, yeah.
for 2 bags of sawdust. And what? Oh, you had to fill it yourself.
Right.
That was the economy drive one then.
And could you brought a big bag? Could you?
Coley brought the biggest bag he could find.
Probably a wool
and
bag.
you can see it was again out of Holiday in Shields. To this day, they're still checking the stuff as it comes out.
Yeah.
It was checked in, paid. So that's just some of the running expenses. The reason for the sawdust was to keep the sheep clean,
Yeah, keep it. Yeah.
right?
And a
Go
bit of
again.
grip as well. Yeah.
Now here's other costs. We're just going to do other costs for the lorry. Diesel was the biggest cost. Tyres were £46, 14 shillings and sixpence. I think that was for 2. So £23 was roughly a million lambs. £23 was roughly 5 or 6 lambs, so it's £500 or £600 for each tyre.
Brian, what were you saying our tyre would be today, roughly speaking?
So we're talking the same ballpark again.
Yeah.
The lorry tax, Brian has told us, is still in around the same money. And the wages, and we're going to talk about the wages. There was a couple of locals. We had Pat Turley. Any of the Turleys here in the night? Nope. And we had Artie O'Hare. They were named in the book as getting wages. And we reckon the wages were no more than £12 a week and normally a tenner.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know the hours that was worked. Coley, no tachographs or anything then? It was whatever hours you put in, you probably got.
Yep.
So this request from Mrs. Hoy, so just in case Edmund gets upset there and goes to the customs and blows the screen on us, you paid, what's Coley, keep me right here, half a crown, that's
Now,
12.5p.
now, Mrs. Hoey was in Dundalk.
Yes.
So she was used if you were bringing sheep down. She filled in the forms for you to come north.
So Mrs. Hoy, and in it you can see also that there was late requests, and they were a bit dearer, because obviously the customs had to stay over to punch the lambs, and punch them means, it doesn't mean to hit them a bottom the bake. It means that you take their ear and you put a hole in it, right? So you can't use it again. Not that that would ever stop anybody. So the sawdust we talked was oil, again, self-greasing lorry, also bits and pieces. The oil was dear for them. Repairs, and here's phone calls were dear. Why? Because there was no phones.
There was no phones, yeah. And father's bill could have been quite expensive
Yes.
sometimes, you know, yeah.
And the reason we put this last one up here was we wanted to know, did anybody know who George Purdy was? That was a great response.
No.
Oh well, you can't take them with you, Thomas.
No.
Right, so we can't find out who George Purdy was. But we think there was an accident in the lorry and the lorry was off the road. And for that reason, George Purdy's lorry was hired. But we can't find out who George Purdy was. Can we go again, please? So again, all we're trying to show here is, saying, for example, for a day's fun, which I think it would be a day's fun, saying you wanted to go from the pass to Limavady to Dublin, and Dublin back to the pass again. On today's roads. You still wouldn't want to do it. But Peter did this quite regularly. All of those. He did all of those roads. Go again, please, Collette. And I reckon there's, Anya and I sat down one day and we tried to do this on Google Maps. So we're using today's data. But there's an average. I was saying, Coley, could you do 25 miles in an hour on average? Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's 4 hours of driving. Now, don't forget, Peter had to help with the loading and unloading of this stuff. It just wasn't a matter of turning up and somebody put it on. So there's a week's driving in this luxury lorry, 1,260 miles. And that comes from this data here. They were going from Limavady, the Pass, Market Hill, Omagh, Rathfriland, the Pass. That's the epicentre of the universe. All right. And Banbridge, and then look at that one, Dungannon, Armagh, Dublin.
Some of them would have been part loads, and these were maybe another dealers. Alec Wilson would have bought a few, and they would have come maybe back to the paddocks and met up with other loads. Yeah. No, as far as I know, they weren't. They were if they were coming. If they were coming from the south, wasn't the ewes taken off along with the cattle that time, Coleman? If you're coming from the south with ewes or cattle, when they offloaded at the border. Yeah. But no, going south because they were punched in the march by the certifying officer. No, but the paperwork had to be done. Yeah.
We'll go again, Collette. Here was other loads that were found in the book. Dawn must have been left with a penile lamb somewhere, and I ended up.
They're not running around yet, are they?
They might be. So in 1959, obviously auctioneers don't sell all that they purport to sell. They get left with an odd animal or two. So these.
That never happened, did Edmund?
Edmund, you never heard tell of that, no. So these sheep must have been lifted at a march somewhere that was left them, and then they were taken to Belfast. Now there wasn't many loads that were for someone else. H&P Crilly, again, let me see, where did I see? Fleeza's daughter is married into the Crillys. Yeah. This would be the same Crillys that lived round the corner and now just moved down. So H&P Crilly, he took some lambs for him. And Harry Ferris, right? Harry Ferris, again, I know he was a neighbour of Peter, and I know that Peter had a lot to do with the Ferrises. He took a load of lambs to Armagh for them on, you may go back through the receipts and see if you get the check. The 15th of the 7th, well, that wasn't right, it wasn't but 2022, like what?
No, don't think so.
Did anybody spot that error, by the way? It's just a mistake. Just in case you didn't get it. I think that was 1959. Like.
Yes, we'll go with that.
We'll go with that. Sure, what'll they know, Tom? They know nothing.
No.
So there you can see that he did other loads, but they weren't very often.
I'm just looking there at the top. We commencing the 29th, 30 sheep from
Acton to
Belfast for Dawn Best.
Yeah, so you can see that there wasn't much else lifted in these lorries. Please again, Collette.
Yes.
I doubt it.
No, when you brought ewes through the border, and they were checked by the border people, right? They had to be brought home, and then you had to get onto the ministry. They had to be dipped, so that they had to come to Poyntzpass, dipped, and a ministry man there, one of the agriculture guys, come out, inspected them being dipped, and then you could have sold them on, but they had to be dipped. Well, a lot of the ewes he would have had a sort of a standing order for them, more or less, but they had to be brought home, dipped first of all. Yeah, they could have been then delivered at a later. Yeah, but they probably wouldn't have been sold for a few days. You got them dipped, got them rested, and got them cleaned up, and then you transported them on. Or sometimes the farmers just simply come to the paddocks and lifted 10 or 15 or whatever it was. Yeah.
So we're finding this again. We're talking about these things here that Peter kept, right? And this one here, it just shows you some of the things. Alec Wilson, who was also a farmer's mart from Market Hill to the Canal Bank, sawdust 2 shillings, phone call 2 shillings, right? Diesel oil 10 shillings, and the request was 4 shillings. That's the request to go down south. And one thing that we did notice that was great to see, there's Peter's thumbprint on that. You know what I mean? That's his thumbprint on it. Mm-hmm. So there's just a typical day as well. 123 lambs from Limavady, 123 from Market Hill, 88 from Oma, and 30 from the Canal Bank. So obviously some brought in the country.
Yes, that made it load up. Yeah.
And 108 lambs from the Canal Bank again from the paddock down to the abattoir. Yeah. We were going through the book, and again, because this is a local historical society, I wanted to see who was in the book. Now, there's a fair few of us. Remember Mervyn Becker, down where Trainer's shop used to be?
And
wasn't this part of Mervin's as well?
Mervin's
Yeah.
Empire, right?
Yeah.
So Mervyn Becker supplied diesel. Trainer's Garage down the street, down Railway Street, they did repairs. O'Hare's Garage in George Pass, for those who know George Pass, out over the Humpback Bridge and into the left, and that's Joe O'Hare, and that's his son. We can't work out who this Murta is in George Pass, motor engineer in George Pass, can't work it out.
Seem to possibly do more body work,
Possibly.
Yeah, yeah.
Brian McCollum in Uri, body work. Rockfoot Service Station, again we know that. And McAlinton's Garage, again most of these businesses are all gone really. And then Jared O'Hare Insurance, McNally and Colgan. Colgan's still there, Michael Colgan that does the car repairs in Edward Street. And this was an interesting one, this S. McCullough Insurance. Gary, where is it? Belfast Road, just across from where the old police barracks was. And then again, Holiday and Shields. So there was plenty of interaction with the locals that we could find. Local workers. Well, is there any of the Turleys in? No.
No.
Pat Turley, well, we all know the legend that was Pat. I hope he declared this the revenue. There's a lot of boys quaking. The 3rd of July, we reckon it's 1959, he got £10 for his week's work. Jim Sloan, still alive. What age do you reckon he is? Right, young fella.
It'd have to be, yeah.
Right, Jim Sloan, wages £12, 15 shillings, and he got paid the request 5 shillings, in other words, for going through the border. A local that lived beside Frank, and we'll go back to Artie O'Hare, and if anybody can help us on this one, we don't know who the D. Turley, the helper, was. There always has to be a gopher in every firm, so we don't know who the gopher was in the lorry, D. Turley, and it says helper. And Mrs. McCamley, she'd been buried today?
No, buried yesterday.
Buried yesterday.
Yes,
That was Willie McCamley's wife, was buried yesterday, and Willie drove occasionally for Peter, and he got £12 for his week. That's the father of Deminex up the road a bit.
He's noted for driving a bit of this lorry, but when the second lorry come along, he was the full-time driver a bit. Yeah.
Also, but I couldn't get a photograph. I just come across this one here, June 1960, and it's signed, the receipt signed by Bridget MacDonald. Bridget, who lived, 3 doors up for years.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so Bridget worked in McAlinton's, so she must have signed this docket 60 years ago. And then, again, Thomas's uncle, your uncle,
Yes, Yvonne, yeah.
and anybody else's uncle. No, it's fair. But tenuous links here, you know. John Sands, he probably knocked his melt out and he got £1 for cleaning the lorry.
Yep.
£1.
Uncle John would have worked for Dawn at that time. Isn't that right, about that time, yeah?
So he got £1 for cleaning the lorry. Can we go again? All good things come to an end. And thank God this one's coming to an end too. I've done over my 40 minutes, Tom. Will we get paid extra?
We'll
think?
make you know.
We'll be in a Klondike for this one. All good things come to an end. And we reckon that this came to the end in about
End of 65, 66, yes. The 2 lorries were sold, and Alan Davison was the first man to draw, as a contractor, to draw them.
And I don't know whether Alan's still alive, but Davison's lorries were going through the pass until recently.
Yeah, yeah.
A.F. Davison, is that the same
He
one?
was a connection to Mrs. McCombs, wasn't he? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So A.F. Davison, and also I remember Robbie Lutton when I was growing up in the pass. He lived in Acton right at the end of the town.
And Billy Harper and those guys. And Thomas's father would have drew some sheep as well sometimes, yeah.
So these people that more or less took over. Peter's health went down a bit, you can understand why. But the lambs continued until the late 1980s. And then, like everything else, new money buys new goods, so we're doing new things. So this was more or less the end of the partnership. Whenever I talked to Tommy McVeigh, we'll see, when was that? In the mid-80s, maybe early 80s, he would have always asked about Peter, and he always said, what a great man, and he never let me down. Whenever I ever come, it was always, I don't think Tommy knew my name, to tell you God's truth. He used to refer to me as young Rafferty. I pity he wasn't doing that today, like, huh? So Tommy had a great time, and you could see that there was great friendship in this in this whole thing. It worked well, but like everything else, it has to come to an end. Roll on there, Collette, please. I thought it was in the Late Show there.
Good Lord.
Now, there's no prize for who these are.
Who's
Right.
the guy with her? Yeah.
That's a very bad fitting wig, I think. Here we have Thomas and Yvonne.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't put this on the QR code, but I have to thank, I have to thank people for this here, because I thought it was interesting to see what happened 60 odd years ago. And Grania and Ryan, they're in the Grania again, sister of Colette's and niece of Peter's, and Ryan, a grand nephew of Peter's. Anya, thanks for bailing me to the IT from time to time. Anya, Kevin's my son and also my IT consultant. And I have to thank Harry and Yvonne, because in desperation, because somebody didn't come up with a photograph.
Right, somebody couldn't.
I didn't say who it was. In desperation, we got photographs of what I wanted, good photographs of Tommy that we could remember, what I remembered Tommy as, and good photographs of Joe that I could remember of Joe. And it was easier to get good photographs of Peter. To see what these people did, these were pioneers. These people did things that we couldn't do today. If you say to somebody, you're going to work 14 hours a day and it's going to be horrible, they'll say, oh, I'm not doing it. These men did it. So thanks very much. Thomas, would you like to say anything?
Yes, just a couple of things before we wind down, and I want to thank Felix, Collette, and all the Rafferty family for obviously this is the key to where the whole thing started. Just on a couple of wee things, I was jotting a few things down before we started. Back in that era, that was a Commer lorry. There was about 11 other makes: Austin, Morris, Bedford, Commer, AEC, Guide, Second Atkinson, ERF, Foden, Ford Thames Trader and Leyland. That will give you an idea roughly of the amount of makes, 11 to 12 makes, all made in England. Unfortunately today, not one of them lorries are made in England. No lorries are made in England anymore, and they're dominated by the Scandinavian lorries like the Volvo, the Scania and so on. So things have moved. The march still continue, but they have changed. A lot of them are no longer in town or city centres. Belfast has moved out, Enniskillen, Omagh, so on. There's a few, but the most of them are moved out. And the thing has moved on. They'll be buying lambs now. There's no grading anymore. They wouldn't be buying them as precise as what them men were buying them, because they were for certain markets. But you would get guys buying now maybe 500 and 600 sheep in one mart, drawing them out and send them to different places. A wee bit different then. But the trade still continues in a different format. And can I thank everybody for turning up and everybody for participating, because it is, and it was a great idea to bring it up, and thank you very much indeed.
Just on behalf of everyone in the room, I'm sure, but from the History Society, just to thank Thomas and Felix and Collette to bring this story. You know, it took a lot of work to bring this story to life for us, and to hear of all the different characters involved, and certainly the partnership that the two men had back in the day, and just also to see, you know, how things changed from then to now. And also how, you know, some things kind of stay the same in terms of friendships and partnerships and family and all the rest of it. So, you know, this is one of the reasons that our History Society is here, is to promote local stories and to keep local knowledge going and recorded, and, you know, so we have it for later on and for other generations to come. So thank you very much, guys, for all your hard work. Thankfully, these guys stepped into the breach this month. So next month we're going to go back to what was supposed to be this month's Stories from the Glen area from Liam Marta, and that will be on November the 3rd, back here at 8 o'clock. So I hear the kettle boiling, so hopefully we're going to get a cup of tea. Okay, thank you very much, folks, and thank you again. Another round of applause for them. Thank you.